Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're looking at this jewelry pack Skyrim by Deja Vuus, I believe is how you pronounce it. Specifically the Circlet here. So here it is in Bruiser Slicer. I've scaled it up to 1400, which actually ended up being a little bit big lengthwise, but it was okay widthwise. So for this particular build, we will be 3D printing it on the artillery sidewinder, and it'll take about 10 hours, give or take. Now, by the looks of things, this has been taken just from the Skyrim game files. There is a lot of polygons going on. You could definitely clean this up, but for this particular build, I just wanted something quick and dirty that would work fine. I wasn't planning on doing a whole lot of cleaning up, I just wanted something that would work. And so now begins the 3D printing montage. Now, I don't know about you guys, but Skyrim is one of my all-time favorite games. I have definitely played it to death. And I remember when I started that I really loved the look of these circlets. Going back now, yeah, they're a little bit dated, they're a little bit clunky, but they were very cool at the time.
Three hours later.
So finally we have the circlet in one piece, and now it's just a matter of taking off all of the supports. This was actually one of the easier prints to take the supports off, which I was thankful for because I hate this part. Now this footage was actually taken probably about a month or so ago. I've definitely gotten better at removing support since then, but as you can see, it doesn't actually fit very well at all. That was a little bit of a problem. But no matter, because this is 3D filament, this is PLA filament, and because of that, we can cut it pretty easily and we can also shape it with heat. So what I'm doing now is I'm marking off how much I need to take off on the sides. Thankfully enough, this actually lines up with the polygon joints. It's very, very cubic looking, and as you can see, there's actually corners where I'm cutting. So that's just going to make it a little bit cleaner. Not too much cleaner though. So now we're just going to take a hacksaw to those lines that I drew on before. Pretty simple stuff. Nothing too fancy, just be aware that if the plastic heats up too much, it will start to melt. So take it slow if you notice anything of that. And would you believe that this clip has actually not been sped up at all? It is in real time. That is how easy it is to cut through this plastic. Now, using a hacksaw like this probably won't give you a nice clean cut. These were pretty disgusting. But, as I said before, this is a quick and dirty build, and I'm not worrying too much about the finish of it. I just wanted something functional that I could use for photos. So, as you can see here, it fits! Success! But, the joints actually don't line up very well. Now, something that I did off camera was I actually took a hairdryer to the front bit of this, which was slightly skinnier than the back, and just gently bent it out a little bit so that it lined up better. As this is a plastic that you can heat up and mold and it will melt, just using a little bit of heat from a hairdryer is all you need to be able to shape it a little bit to size. So if you did print this out and found that maybe it was the right size but the width was a bit too thin, you could actually heat it up and pull it apart slightly, and that'll do the trick. Now I tried a few different glues to get this to stick together, but due to my impatience, I ended up just using hot glue. Seemed to work fine. It's not as strong as something like epoxy, but it did the job. So there we go, it fits. Success. Awesome. Now it's time for the painting. So to start off, I am applying a coat of black primer. This is just so any further paints are going to stick to the plastic. And of course, don't forget to do the other side as well. And here it is, all dry and ready for paint. Now, if you wanted to clean this up further, definitely give this a sand, but I really couldn't be bothered. And you can see on the sides there, the joints are disgusting. But this was good enough for me in this case. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just masking the gems so that I can spray paint the entire circlet in silver and, you know, not get anything on the gems, which I can paint later. I ended up spraying this in a chrome spray paint, which I actually didn't like the look of. If you look at photos in-game of the silver circlet, it's actually pretty dirty looking. It looks more like a brushed metal look. So first I did spray paint this in chrome, hated it, ended up spray painting it in black again with the primer, and I ended up just brushing on some silver acrylic paint, and that looked great to me. But I'll show you this process anyway, in case you do want something that's a little bit more shiny and sparkly. Now I didn't have any painter's tape, so I'm just using this masking tape. It's not the best, it was awful to work with, but it did the job. So that's the gems all masked up, and this is what the chrome paint looked like. You could definitely brush on some black acrylic paint as a wash, or something like that, just to make it look a little bit darker, fill in those crevices a little bit. But I couldn't get it to work, so, you know, I repainted it. But as you can see here, if you did end up spray painting the metal, you could definitely just take off the masking and you've got the black gems underneath. There was a little bit of leaking happening with this tape because obviously I'm not using the right sort of tape, but it did the trick. So as I said, I didn't like the chrome very much, so I gave it another coat of primer. Technically you should probably try to like sand the chrome off, but as I said, this was a quick and dirty build. So here I've got some black acrylic paint and I've got some silver acrylic paint. Nothing too special. I just picked it up from the newsagents. That was good enough for me. And what I'm doing is I'm going to dry brush this onto the black. So that means very little water. I'm not a perfect artist in any case. I've not been trained, but this is what works for me. Just a dry brush and brushing it over lightly, slowly building up the coats until you've got something that's the right sort of color, right sort of consistency. Now, I'm very sorry for these very amateur shots. In future, I will learn that the camera should go on the left side because I am right-handed and my hand always blocks the image, but you get the gist of it. So this is now sped up, as you can probably tell by how fast I'm moving. And I'm also focusing on trying to get more paint on the corners, on the joints, you know, anything that's an edge. That'll just make it stand out a bit better and look more like metal, essentially. Again, you can see the really terrible join I've got going on where I cut the piece out. Remember, you can definitely sand that back. You can definitely sand away these print lines as well, but I just couldn't be bothered. I wanted a Skyrim Circlet for the sake of having a Skyrim Circlet, and I didn't care too much of the quality of it. Another way you can mask up these print lines is you could put some sort of like a plaster or a clay over the top of it and smooth it out. You could also achieve something similar by heating up the plastic and melting it, but I haven't worked out a way to make that work nicely and consistently yet. So here I'm also putting on some black acrylic paint in the joints just to make it, you know, give it a bit more depth, make it look a little bit more dirty and Skyrim-like. And it seems to do the trick. This was a little tricky to do with a brush. If you had an airbrush, I would definitely recommend using that, but I don't have one at this stage. I also found with this particular build that the directions of your brush strokes made a difference. So just play around with it if you are brushing some sort of silver paint over a model and see what works best for you. A lot of the time I found it worked best if I followed the sort of contours that are shown in the metal, what it suggests, but that's totally up to you. And again, my hand's in the way, sorry. Alrighty, so now it is time to paint the gems. I'm really happy with how the silver turned out. It took a couple of coats, but you know, you just work up to the finished product. Now the gems, I was planning on having them to be like a sapphire or a moonstone feel from the game, and this took me a while to work out how to do it. I watched a couple of tutorials, especially things like miniature painting or you know, painting for board games. That was really helpful. There was a couple of tutorials on how to paint gems, and I sort of ended up coming up with a mixture of them. This first thing I was trying to do was to, it's sort of a Photoshop technique in a way, where you lay down the highlights and the shadows in black and white, and then you build the color on top of that. So this particular one here was following a tutorial, and you guys might find this interesting, but I ended up painting over a lot of this. I didn't use a lot of it, but it did help me get into the feel of how a gem should really look. Now this particular tutorial was actually for a rounded gem, so definitely these little faces would make a difference in how the light should reflect off them. Now this technique took a lot of time, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of just blocking in colours and sort of trying to blend the old one so that it looked realistic. And so now that I had the gradients down, I went by adding a blue over the top. This is almost a wash, but it wasn't quite turning out as expected. I don't think I had the right paints to do this sort of technique. So I sort of threw it out the window a little bit. I built up the blue to be thicker, and I just mainly ignored the undercoat that I took so long to do, so that was a little bit disappointing, but you know. If you are doing this technique, do make sure that the undercoat is dry before you put the colour on top. But now I'm just going over with a different type of blue and trying to add a little bit more depth to it. And I continued to build up these different colours, different highlights, and I think doing the grayscale highlights underneath before doing this actually helped me work out what the lighting situation should be, what the color gradient should be on these gems. So it wasn't completely for nothing. Now for this part of the painting, I was actually following an image of it was like a high-res version of the circlet. It had some really nice looking gems on it, and I was able to follow that photo for a good idea of how the highlights should happen. If you actually look at the base game of Skyrim and how the gemstones are in that game, they're pretty terrible looking, so I would recommend looking at some mods instead for reference, because otherwise they sort of just like look like Meridia's beacon, and it's not the nicest looking thing in the world, and not something you want to find in a chest. So once the painting was done, I gave it a spray of a glossy clear finishing coat, and that was mainly just on the gems. I tried to avoid the metal itself because I still wanted to have that matte sort of looking feel, but the gems I wanted to sparkle. Now I think I used too much spray because I actually had some bubbling issues, but the paint ended up shrinking and actually working okay. And this is how it turned out. Now for something that didn't take very long to build and I did no sanding on it whatsoever, it actually turned out pretty well, and I'm really happy with this, and it looks awesome in photos, and I will show you a little photo I did for my Instagram in this exact outfit. And this was a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and as always, I will see you next Friday. Bye!